So there's a great story, though, not to waste your time, but there's a great story about Washington Square Park. New York is really, the real New York is from Houston Street and down. Anything above Houston Street, when they started to make the city into a grid, all the streets went all kinds of which ways. It looks like Boston, it's just, the streets are all whacked and there's no rhyme or reason to it. And then in 17-something, they decided, okay, everything above Houston Street is going to be exactly north and exactly east, north-south and exactly east-west.
Right.
So they designed this grid, and every block north and south was a tenth of a mile, and every block east and west was 3/10 of a mile. 2/10 of a mile.
Really
so
measured.
So if you're on 10th Street and you're walking to 20th Street, you know that you're going to walk a mile.
Oh, yep.
So it's exactly by walking to 10 blocks, it's exactly a mile. So anyway, they made this grid, and they only allowed one street to not be on the grid, and that was Broadway. So Broadway goes this way and that way, and all the way up to the Bronx. So. Where Washington Square Park is, it was not a park, it was just a field, and they made it into Potter's Field.
Potter's Field.
And so they had to keep expanding Potter's Field because in the 1600s, everybody was dying from poisoning by water. The water was very polluted here. And so they decided they were going to clean up the water by pouring alcohol into it. And so everybody was drunk as skunks, and that's where they have towns called Tarrytown, which means that they get drunk and they go screw around. When people tarry. And anyway, underneath the Washington Square Park, they covered over a river, and it was called the Minetta River. So you've heard of the Minetta Lane Theater. So there was this river called the Minetta River, and every time there was a storm, well, they had the Potter's Field on top of it, and every time there was a storm and the river overflowed, it would pop the bodies out of the ground. And so their little pine boxes would be floating around. You got an arm and a leg and so on and so forth. And when they finally moved uptown, so Washington Square Park is at 8th Street, 7th Street. Anyway, the Minetta River also runs under the theater that became Electric Lady Studios, which is in the basement of this very cool architect building that, my best friend, he designed Electric Lady Studios, and he used to call me. He says, come on, we got to go downtown. You got to see this. And we would go down, and the floor of the studio would be buckled 6 feet high from the river overflowing and pushing the floor up. And they had sump pumps, and if there was a really bad storm, the sump pumps would fail. So there's a lot of history about that. When they gentrified Washington Square, because the rich people didn't have any place below Houston Street to live, to build houses anymore, and they wanted new houses. So they moved all the bodies out of Washington Square Park and sent them out to Staten Island, and they called where they buried them a kill, Kill. Anyway, if you want to read a cool book about New York, it's called Downtown by Pete Hamill, and it's written like a newspaper article, and it's got stories. Gangs of New York. That's a true story.
Yeah,
and that's in there. And his father was an alcoholic. He was a musician. He played in a bar, and he had to cut both legs off, and because he had gangrene and blah blah blah. And anyway, his mother would walk him across the Brooklyn Bridge every day and teach him another story about New York City. So Pete Hamill was pretty,
nice.
Knock 'em, sock 'em, rock 'em.
So we captured
anyway,
it.
Let's go to work. So
that's
I have,
great. Well,
I have
we're
few
already
stories.
Yeah, we're already working. That's in. I mean,
Okay.
That one can work. I mean, these are the pieces that I've read bits and pieces of Gotham, the book, because it's so huge, and watched lots of gangs in New York. And you go back, and I've walked all over New York, for work and travel. And, try to piece things together. It's such a long history. It's amazing. All these old cities,
So one of the things that's very cool is that being in the real estate business in New York City, actually being in the studio business in New York City, one of the cool places that had cool buildings was Tiffany's. And so Comfort Tiffany built all these places to sell his jewelry. And every place that he built had a top floor. And the top floor had very high ceilings, and the ceilings were all crystal glass so that the sun would shine through and make the diamonds sparkle.
Nice.
So I tried to buy one of them. So the first Tiffany's is way downtown, long gone. The second Tiffany's is, way downtown in Wall Street. The second Tiffany's is on 9th Street and Broadway, and it's this red brick, like the red brownstones place, and that was Tiffany number 2. Then they moved uptown. Tiffany number 3 is on the corner of 38th or 39th Street and 6th Avenue, because that was going to be the new uptown. And then the last Tiffany's they built is the one on the corner of 57th and 5th. That Trump Tower is over.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the one that's on 38th Street is the one that I went to, and I tried to make it into a studio because it didn't have any columns. It was just these metal girders holding up, but it had crashed, and it was going to cost too much money, and everything had to come up and down in an elevator. And I went, because I was trying to build an orchestral room, and this was in early 80s. Early 80s. I was making too much money and decided that, okay, if I'm making enough money, I could have a recording studio that I could lose money on, because nobody makes money on a big studio except for Abbey Road, which is owned by, some big record. Well, it's owned by a record label, EMI.
Yep. So this is part of the Howard Schwartz recording story.
You bet.
Let's get into that then.
So how do you want to start this out?
I want to start. I mean, our outline is really open. So, so I'm, and like I said,
and what do I do today? I tell stories.
This is always what I'll introduce you, and we'll kind of have an open, whatever. But yeah, just to kind of say who you are and what you do and whatnot, and I'll open that up. But then really, I just want to go through these main points of, early years, how you got there, kind of the state of the industry. Part of what I wanted to kind of give people a focus on is, an audience of the fact that, what life was like back then, what the recording industry was like, all of those, any of that stuff. And then, launching it, running it, the catalyst of how you launched it, how you got started, all of that stuff. And then, clients and stories, just a few, whatever comes up.
Whatever we can squeeze in.
Exactly. It kind of the highlights of whatever I say, whatever you want to share, but I also say whatever comes up, because you never know what's going to come up. You never know
with me. So it's like, as you're asking me, as you're telling me that, I'm going through, okay, well, do I tell this story? Should I tell that story?
Let's just have it go natural.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, because let's get started.
You
can always plug in an intro without me here, so we can do that at a later date.
Yeah, these ones are all, this is so loose, this is all rough, stuff. But let's just start with who you are and what you do today.
My name is Howie Schwartz. My name is Howie Schwartz, and I've always hated my real name, which is Howard. The only time I heard it was when somebody was mad at me, and they would go, Howard, and I hated it.
So you were always called
I always called myself Howie, and I
Okay.
wrote Howie, and I knew how to make Howie, and it's just my email is Howie, and everything was Howie because it was always informal, and it also never showed my age.
That's good.
Because when I was 16 and being a musician, I was Howie. And when I played with the New York Philharmonic or the Buffalo Philharmonic, I played the bassoon. I went to Eastman School of Music. I mean, this is all of my background. I also play the trumpet, and I play the piano, and I play bass. And I was in a folk group called America's Children when I was a kid at the Eastman School of Music. My roommates in college were Steve Gadd, Tony Levin. One of my instructors was Chuck Mangione. One of my dear friends was Lou Soloff, one of the great trumpet players of all time, who was, with the Blues Brothers and Alan. It's just, there's a million people. Don Palouse is a graduate of the Eastman School of Music, and who's the mastering guy from Maine? He's also a graduate. Mitch Miller was a graduate of Eastman, and he also became the director of Eastman, and he was a whole other story. There's somebody should try and do the history of Mitch Miller, who was Sing Along with Mitch on television. He was the head of the Eastman School of Music, and he lived up here in Connecticut, and it was interesting. His home was called the Silo, and you went in the silo, and his wife had taken all his music. It was very cool. Anyway,
so this is what time frame that around
all right,
that
I graduated from high school in 1966. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I went to Kenmore West Senior High School. My class was 3,200 kids. My senior class was 3,200. I am a real baby boomer. I was born on September 18th, 1946, 9 months and 10 days from when my father came home from Europe in the military, and my mother waited for him and met him on Kapok Street in the Bronx, where my father's best friend, who was 4F, didn't get into the service, had a pet shop. And he had an apartment above the pet shop where my mother met my father, and voila.
There
I'm
it
the
is.
result of that,
Yeah, you're very clearly cemented right in there in the boomer
cemented
story.
right in there. And when I look up stuff on online, and I look at everybody's birthday, and he's older than me. She's older than me. This is great. Okay, and then I have friends that are now turning 80, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm not 80, but
Yeah.
I have a big birthday coming up. So, so anyway, I started out playing the drums, actually the timpani, because I have relative pitch. Some people call it perfect pitch. I can tune anything. I totally understand. I mean, it hurts me when it's not in tune. I mean, the concert the other night where Barry Manilow was singing, and, give him a lot of credit for what he did, but it's ready. Pack it in, Bear. And I have a friend who called him Jiminy Cricket. We used to run into each other over the years because he used to work on Tin Pan Alley and with Bette Midler and with Ronnie Dante and with all these Joey Levine. They wrote all these rock and roll songs. Yummy, yummy, yummy. I got love in my tummy. And Barry Manilow, you write the song that makes the whole world.
Yep, that was my childhood.
These are people that we all grew up with. So I grew up with. So I played the timpani, and I got bored with the timpani after about 6 months, going boom, 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 boom. And I went to the music director of the school and the junior high school, and I said, I want to play a saxophone or a clarinet. I want to play a melody. And he says, oh, man, that's too bad. I said, why? He says, well, we don't have any instruments left. But I do have a bassoon. And I go, okay, what's a bassoon?
Yeah, it's not a very sexy sounding name.
Yeah, not very sexy sounding. So he pulls out this thing, and it's like this long, stupid thing, and it's like, And then he slips me the Mickey, and he goes, if you play the bassoon halfway good, you don't even have to be great at it. You can get into any school in America for free because every school needs a bassoon player for their orchestra. And I'm going, ding, 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 because my grades sucked. I was a terrible student.
Man.
I just didn't, me and school were not pals. Yeah, but music was my salvation because I got good at it. I got good at it quick. And I knew that I was going to be able to go to any school I wanted to go to because I played the bassoon. I wound up going to a music school, Eastman School of Music, but I also got accepted to West Point. I got accepted to Juilliard. I got accepted to Curtis. I got accepted to all these.
Well, what made you choose Eastman then?
It was of the music schools. It was the only one that had academics because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to be the first bassoonist at the New York Philharmonic, which was the only bassoon position in America that paid anything. So,
that's interesting.
You know, and I wanted to be a musician, but I also wanted to be well off. I wanted to make a living.
Yeah.
So, I went to Eastman for a year, and in that year I got involved with a folk group, and we made a bunch of records, and we were on a TV show called Hootenanny, and which is an old show that we used to travel to colleges and play as the warm-up act. And Alan Arkin, the famous actor, used to be in a group called the Terriers, and his son, I forget his first name, but anyway, he has two sons. Both are voiceover guys, and said, "My dad says hi." And I go, "Really?" And so he says, "Yeah, he remembers you from the old days when he was in the Terriers." And I go, "Oh, God." So that was very cool.
It's amazing what people remember.
What people remember. So Alan Arkin and I forget. Well, people can look him up. So anyway, I went to Eastman School. I spent a year there, and it wasn't for me, or I wasn't for them. There's a much longer story that I'll tell it fast. I worked at a nightclub every night of the week to make money because I only got like $10 a month for what do you call it?
Room and board.
For my what do you give your kids?
Oh, allowance.
My allowance. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
So, and I would get home at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I would have an 8 o'clock music theory class, and I would go to the theory class dragging my ass to school.
Oh, that's hard.
0 degrees or colder through the snow. The dorm wasn't anywhere near where the Eastman School was, and you had to walk in the snow with your instrument because you had to take it home. But anyway, I had an 8 o'clock class, and after the 8 o'clock class, I went to sleep in our practice rooms, which were in a separate building from where the classrooms were. And I would sleep up there, and there was a double reed room, which I was in, and next to that was the marimba room, and then the percussion room, and every group, single reeds, double reeds, had a room that you practiced in, and you made your reeds, and you fixed your instruments, and so on and so forth. Well, it was too noisy. I couldn't sleep. My next class was at 12, so I figured out how to sneak into the Eastman Theater, which is attached to the school. And there was this door that you could go through, and there were these couches up on the 3rd floor. I'm going to send you the picture.
Okay.
I'm not, and I fell asleep on the couch. I fell asleep on the couch, and one day, and that was great. I did it for a few weeks, and one day I got awakened by the lady who was the head of the school. She kicked my feet and said, "Hey, Howie, time to get up." And I said, what's the matter? And he said, "There's been a complaint about you." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, look down on the stage." And down on the stage of the Eastman Theater, which is this gorgeous, huge 2,800-seat theater built by McKim Mead White, the ragtime the story of ragtime. They built the Eastman Theater for George Eastman and Thomas Edison were the founders of the Eastman School of Music to make musicians to play for the silent movies. That's why Eastman was started.
Yeah. Okay.
So they said. She said, "Look who's there." And I look, and the Rochester Philharmonic is rehearsing, and the conductor is Aaron Copland. and I look and I go, "Oh, God, that's not good." She said, No, he complained. And I said, "Oh, great." So it wasn't long after that where they said, "Okay, school's over for you." And so I went back to Buffalo, and I continued my music there. The University of Buffalo had a fabulous music program, but I was, trying to take business courses or whatever. There was a group called the Budapest String Quartet, which was always in residence at the University of Buffalo, and Misha Schneider, Misha Dichter. They were just these unbelievable musicians, and they were involved with Lucas Voss, who was the director of the Buffalo Philharmonic. These are all famous people from the past. Anyway, in the middle of all that, I got drafted. So that changed everything. Okay, you're 4A, you're in. You're not taking enough credits in school, so I was working at a radio station at night and going to school during the day, and the two didn't mix well. And so anyway, I became a disc jockey at that time, and then I got drafted, and I became a disc jockey in the military. And because of my music background, it was a natural. I could talk about it, I could edit it, I could, interview people.
And it had a place there too, a need. There was a need for that.
There was no internet. There was hardly television. I mean, we had 3 channels, and the public broadcasting, Channel 13 in Buffalo. So anyway, I got sent overseas to Germany, behind the Iron Curtain. I signed up for an extra year to make sure I didn't go to Vietnam. I did not want to go to Vietnam.
So signing up for an extra year
means I enlisted I went from being drafted, which is your number is U.S. if you're drafted, and you have this number. And then when you switch over to choose where you want to be in those days, and I had a little help from some friends that I played golf with, which, I was a kid. And another long story, call me and I'll tell you the whole story.
All right.
And so, anyway, and my number became RA 127674778. You never forget that. So I get sent to Germany, and all of a sudden I'm behind the Iron Curtain, and I'm stationed in Berlin. Wow. And I'm a disc jockey from midnight till 6 in the morning when the Russians really control the airwaves in Berlin. This is 1966. So Berlin is controlled by France, England, Russia, and the United States. But the Iron Curtain is between the Russian part of East Berlin and the other 3 parts, which was West Berlin. And so I was in the West, and we used to travel over there. But I was on from midnight to 6 because if the station went off the air, and just do propaganda all night. So it was just this crazy kind of time.
Wow. Yeah.
And I would be walking down the street, and I'd hear, the reason everybody recognized me is they decided they were going to do a television station. The Air Force was going to do a television station in Berlin, and nobody had any experience. And so I said, I do. And I didn't.
Of course.
And so, but I was a disc jockey, so it was a lot easier for me to just go on camera.
Yeah.
No air conditioning, heavy duty lights, the giant, cameras that are, and I, we had to polish the brass. That's a term, and you polish your brass.
Right.
It's a term, and your shoes had to be really shiny. But then they said to me, okay, we got to spray the brass because if, God forbid, there was a reflection off of the brass into a camera, you burn a little hole in the back of the the TV thing. Anyway,
so they would spray it with something to kind of.
They would spray it with
up.
This dulling. Yeah. It was goo, essentially, flat goo. Anyway, I had a lot of interesting people on my show, including Diana Ross and the Supremes. But they were the Supremes when we booked them, and then she outed herself and said, "Okay, Howie, you've got to say." And here is Diana Ross and the Supremes. It was that day when she was on my show that she announced. Yeah. So
that was her announcing that she was
going to be the lead of the group.
Yeah.
She was, she and Barry Gordy had a relationship, and and there were kids, and so there was 66, 67. Anyway. So then I stayed in Europe for another couple of years. In 1968, I came home. It was time for me to come home. I did my 3 years.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be in Buffalo, and I said, I'm going to be a disc jockey in L.A. So I drive out to L.A. with a friend of mine, Bob Baker, who became a teacher. We rented this cool house in Manhattan Beach, right on the ocean.
Is this where you were going then? Like, because I want to talk a little bit about some of the business and the music side of things, but
Okay.
because you went into being a disc jockey and then you spent that time in the service there, is that why you decided to stay with it when you got out?
I went to the path of least resistance because who the hell knew?
It was
what I
the
wound
flow.
up doing didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a guy over here that had a studio. There was record labels that had studios. CBS, Columbia Records had a studio, and all the record labels had studios. But independent guys, there weren't many of those. And you look on the albums, and in those days you didn't look on the back and say who was the engineer on that record.
Right.
We do now, and
Right.
and I did for the last 50 years. But so I went out there. I couldn't get a job in the business, but I had a lot of friends at Armed Forces Radio, which was in L.A. And my friend Ken Allen, who is still around, he worked for CBS Sports for 1,000,000 years. Anyway, I eventually got a job working at a old radio station that was turned into a recording studio. It was called C.P. McGregor Recording on Western and Wilshire by the Wiltern Theater. And Bob's Big Boy was right next door. I don't know if you know, that's Koreatown now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there was this theater, this big studio where they recorded Nat King Cole, Ozzy, Ozzy and Harriet, lots of old radio shows. King Cole's Court was Nat King Cole in this full orchestra. The studio was humongous. You could put 100 people in there easy.
Yeah.
And so I got hired to record a radio show called Heartbeat Theater, which was one of these radio shows, a sob story radio show, sponsored by the Salvation Army. And it was always, somebody got drunk and, was beat his wife and so on and so forth. And I was just all these sad stories. But I made a friend of a guy by the name of Marvin Miller. Marvin Miller was the voice of The Millionaire. He was the star of a TV show called The Millionaire, where he had a boss. His name was John Beresford Tipton, and he gave away $1 million every week on his show. Wow. A check. Here's $1 million. It was, and so
That's
he and
a
I
lot of
became
money
friends.
back then. Yeah.
Oh my God, it was crazy. But he was a pretty wealthy guy because he's an old radio dude. And we became friends, and he had a Mercedes Gullwing, a 1960 whatever. Oh my God! So because of his car collection, we became friends. Anyway, who knows?
Yeah.
I got to drive it once. Anyhow, I also met Gary Owens from beautiful downtown Burbank, because these were all the actors who were on this radio show.
Yeah.
So Gary says to me one day, he says, "Howie, this is kind of dead end here, isn't it?" And I go, "Yeah, I don't think it's going anyplace, because the guy who owned it died and the wife was trying to keep it going, and they were holding on for the oil rights underneath the building because Stevie Wonder eventually bought the studio, and we have a friend in common that actually worked there. It was not Daniel, but one of our guys from our Thursday thing worked for Stevie Wonder at that studio when it was called Wonderland.
Oh man,
so one of the people has the story, but he didn't work there much, And I went to work for Mel Blanc, the voice of Bugs Bunny, as an editor, because that's what I did the best. I learned how to be a good editor, cutting tape with a razor blade or a scissors, or with the editing blocks that go on top of tape recorders, because I interviewed 1 million people. I got this opportunity to interview people to be on my radio shows, and I wasn't very good at it, so I had to learn how to edit. So I had to learn how to make myself sound good. So I spent whatever minutes I could cutting tape to make me sound good. That's how I learned to be a good editor.
And editing is such an intense skill. Like, it's really what makes things work.
Correct.
Correct. It really tells the story.
But fast forward to when I had my own business, I couldn't. I tried to hire everybody that had a great attitude, but I always had a roadblock when I tried to hire somebody that wasn't. You and I had this conversation. That wasn't a musician, and didn't speak the music language that wanted to be a mixer or an editor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, if I tell you I want you to cut in on the upbeat of bar 3 and take out bar 4, bar 5, bar 6, and go back in at the upbeat of bar 7. I'm speaking Russian compared to.
You have to know what you're.
You got to know what you're doing, right?
Right.
So that helped me out when I went to work for Mel Blanc. I recorded Bugs Bunny and Fred Flintstone, and well, he was Barney Rubble. Mel Blanc was radio commercials, comedy radio commercials with Gary Owens, and it wasn't Chicken Man, but it was Super Fun was the name of the radio stuff, and it was inserts that went into radio shows all over the country for a million years. And
I mean, I grew up with Mel Blanc, so and he's got many early years before that, but my generation is that permeates the whole childhood.
He had I mean, his wife Estelle was the nicest person. I played paddle tennis in the 60s when I got to LA with his son Noel, and we used to play paddle tennis with every Sunday morning, and it was a surprise. So one day Noel said, "Come on over, we're playing paddle tennis." I said, "Okay, who's playing?" He says, "You'll see." And so his next door neighbor on one side on Rodeo Drive on the in the flats was Carl Reiner, and across the street was Gene Kelly. So that was the group.
Nice.
And I'm 22 years old or 23 years old. I'm going, this is pretty cool. And anyway, so I worked there for a while, and then I got a call from a fellow by the name of Wally Hyder. I mean, we're skipping way ahead. No, actually, we're not. So I got a call from this guy, Wally Hyder, through a maintenance guy, technical engineer that worked for him. And he said, "I'm looking for an editor because I got this idea." And so I got recommended 3 ways, and I went to talk to him, and he built a system where he bought radio jingles without the vocals on them. So I went to visit Wally Hyder, who wanted to take jingles, 77 WABC, or whatever, and sell them in 10, 20, 30-second, 60-second bits to advertisers for a fee. So it's essentially the first music library.
I was going to say the first licensing
music library. So it was the guys in Dallas. I don't remember what the jingle guys in Dallas' name was. But anyway, there was a computer in San Francisco, a UNIVAC computer in San Francisco that we used to talk to with punch cards. I had the library, and basically the computer was information. It was, your Dewey Decimal System, essentially.
Right.
And my job was to describe the track, cut it into 10, 20, 30 seconds with a beginning and an end. No fades in those days. It had an end. We don't do fades.
Yeah, not for jingles either.
Not for jingles. Boom, done, finished. And so I did that for a while. And one day I got a call in the studio, and Wally said to me, Wally Hyder was owned partly by the Beach Boys because they loved the way he recorded. This is a whole other story. He was a very famous Stan Kenton recording engineer. He traveled up and down the West Coast and recorded Stan Kenton at all the great places. And if you want to, you'll look it up, Stan Kenton at Redlands College. Wally Hyder, I was the assistant on it, one of the assistants on it, and he said, "What are you doing tonight?" And he said, "Come on, get in the car." Okay. Loosey-goosey, we drove out to Redlands, and everything was set up when we got there. And then he said, "Okay, change this mic to move around here, blah, blah, blah. And you'll listen to the concert and put it on headphones because it's unbelievable." So Wally Hyder did that. And so it was a famous studio. Everybody recorded there. It was on the corner of Selma and Cahuenga. There was 2 rooms, one little room, which the Beach Boys used a lot until they put something in their house. One of them bought Ronald Reagan's house on Bel Air Drive.
Okay.
Pretty cool. So we used to go up there and record. Oh, my God. That's a whole other book. But Fifth Dimension and Jefferson Airplane, and they were all there. And I got called one day. Howie, what are you doing? Come down to Studio 3. He started with Studio 3. 3
He started.
And then 1. Yeah.
Okay.
The first studio was 3 and then 1. Said the group wants to keep going and the engineer's like out of it. I said, okay. So I walk in and it's Crosby, Stills and Nash. And they're just recording. And Young. And that's the second album. And so I started to work with them. And I stayed with them for about 2 years. Not as their real engineer. I was an assistant. I wasn't, but you did everything anyway.
Yeah, right. That's what the assistant does.
And then we did an album called Four-Way Street, which was concerts all over the country, and then put those together. And then Earthquake, 1971. I said, bye. I'm out of here. I lived up on top of Gower Canyon underneath the Hollywood sign, and my house went down the hill.
Wow.
And the earthquake, and I go, I was making like $300 a week, 1971. Wow. It was a lot of money, but
not when your house goes down like that.
Yeah, and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I packed up my dog and my bass, and I said, okay, let's go. I had a big upright bass, which I just donated to a museum here.
Oh, nice.
And I drove back to Buffalo. But I had, did a million concerts, Carole King and James Taylor at the Troubadour. I mean, I worked on the truck and that. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I wasn't the engineer on anything. I was on everything.
Yeah,
Roger Nichols was my assistant. When I had the music library for 5 minutes. They said, here, you stay here. And, okay, and this is your assistant, Roger Nichols. I go, okay. So
you were moving around with all of these different things, and you were making connections.
Yes, I wasn't necessarily leaving. I got fired from every job I ever had. Every job I ever had.
Why was that?
I always thought I thought my value was greater than I was being paid. So that happened a lot.
Yeah.
And so when I came back to New York, I actually took a hiatus and went to Canada for 8 or 10 months, and I worked for a radio station there, 1050 Chum in Toronto. But more important than that, I met a lot of people in the record business because I had friends in common, and Gordon Lightfoot, and
you met him in the record business in Canada.
In Canada, yes.
Okay.
Because of my background in rock and roll in New York, in L.A.
In L.A.
And there was a wonderful man there by the name of Dave Green, whose brother was Ed Green, who was the most famous live mixer for television shows ever. He's no longer with us, but Dave and I have been friends for a gazillion years, and he had just built a studio called Manta Sound in Toronto, which was real rich, two brothers, real rich, that they built this amazing studio, and they hired Dave to come and finish it off. So the inside of the studio looked like A&R Recording, which kind of was Phil Ramone's place, and he just kind of copied it, but new. And, with floating gobos, floating ISO booths, the drums.
Yep.
The drums were in a thing on wheels that you moved wherever you wanted to in this giant room. So anyway, I got to meet all these guys, and eventually in 1972, I moved back to New York City. I moved to New York City for the first time. I got a job working at a recording studio called National Recording, which was a very big deal here, but old school, but big deal. And I worked there for about a year, and they fired me. Because I was sticking up for a guy who I shouldn't have, and who I thought was wrong. He got into a fight. I didn't own anything ever. I didn't know what if somebody fights, physical fight, history.
Yeah.
So you learn your lesson, and so then I worked for a little studio called 12 East Recording, and at 12 East Recording, this is how I decided to go into my own business. I was the second engineer, but I was a mixer, editor, doing radio commercials.
Okay, and I want to talk about that, getting into that. So how long were you in? So how long was your time in LA? You think?
3 years.
3 years there, and then you were in Canada for about how long?
8 months, 9 months. Yep. I picked up a wife on the way.
Because you've got a lot of experiences and a lot of things packed into these times.
Yeah, I knew who I didn't want to be like. That was an easy one.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of those. There's a couple of things that I want to really highlight as we move forward into this next part of the conversation.
Okay.
And one of them is that you were going into music school, learning music, but you had a clear sense that you wanted to do well. You wanted to make money.
Yeah.
And you wanted to know business, and that's something that. Even now,
that wasn't that. My father was an accountant, so
was an accountant.
Yeah. So that was kind of drilled into my head, and
there's a piece.
But I didn't. My dad and I unfortunately didn't get along very well. I probably have some kind of dyslexia. My brother has it too, but I was able to overcome a lot of that. I have attention span of a flea, and
that wasn't given attention back in those days.
No,
with kids
nobody
in school.
knew.
You struggle with it. You don't know about it.
My mother fought for my brother. My brother went to a school for dyslexia, and so he didn't write well and read, and he's fine now. But it's just.
Well, how did your parents feel about you doing music then? Because if you're coming from that accountant side, because I want to get at a little bit of a conversation here about doing music or the arts was never all that compatible with making money. And it still isn't, which is not the right thing to do. To me, there's more opportunities than people realize, but they're often at odds with each other. So how did your family think about that, music-wise?
I wasn't around much, so I don't.
Okay.
I was either playing in a concert. From the time I'm 16, I'm in a concert or a rehearsal every night of the week. Saturday mornings, I'm rehearsing with the Buffalo Philharmonic. I'm playing at the theater in the Round. I'm all over the place. Mm-hmm. I'm playing the bassoon. Then when I got into the music business, studio business. And all the different facets of it, I took the path of least resistance. I wasn't, because I was good at editing. I was really, really good at editing. I had the best ears of most people that I knew because as a bassoonist, I sat in the middle of the orchestra and I knew what all those instruments are supposed to sound like because I was there. Mm-hmm. Every trumpet player was blowing their asses off in my ears. The clarinet player was right next to me. I certainly knew what he was. Oboe was in front. Flute player was over there. I could sort of hear the violins. Rarely heard the violas. Cellos were okay, but the basses were behind me, so I could hear them. But I knew what these instruments sounded like because I played them also. Yeah, so when I would go in with a microphone, I had to translate what I thought the instrument was going to sound like, to go through a microphone, to come into the control room, to go through all the junk in there, and come out the speakers. So
you knew what it was supposed to sound like. Well, even just your ear being tuned right from the early days with the timpani. You talked about being able to pick that up. You have that kind of naturally.
You certainly know if something's not in tempo. That's easy. Yeah. If somebody's, because they never complain about the picture. They complain about, his pitch is off, or the tempo's wrong, or he's late, or he screwed that. So that was the easy stuff for me. The hard stuff for everybody else was the absolute simple stuff for me. Cool. But here's what really was my thing, is that I wanted to be with my friends, the musicians. I wasn't friends with the engineers. I was friends with all of the musicians that would come into the studio all the time. And we have stories that go back a million years. And when I told you the stories about being in L.A., who are the people that I talked about? The people on the other side of the glass, the ones that are out in the studio, those are the ones that I wanted to be with.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be like them because I wasn't Gary Owens. I wasn't, he was like this gazillionaire.
Yeah.
And great and hysterical. But I had friends that were in the wrecking crew. They were all my buddies because I had to set them up every day when they came into the studio. And Hal Blaine and Larry Knechtel and Joe Osborne and all those guys, we hung out because I was the assistant who was really doing the dirty work in the studios.
Yeah, and they probably trusted you because of that.
Yeah, well, they knew me by name, Howie. So that was easy. So I always wanted to be on that side of the glass, but I wasn't making it on that side of the glass. But I still wanted to be around all of them. So okay, so I'll do the best I can because I certainly wasn't going to make any more rock and roll records. I went on the other side of the glass and I said, okay, this is what I'm going to be. So. Because of my Mel Blanc background and the rock and roll background, when I came to New York, I brought with me the L.A. style because everything was New York up until the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, Jimi Hendrix died in 71. Yeah. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, I know.
It's just, he's gone, but he changed everything when he built his own studio. None of the other artists did that. He was going to build, this is John Stork's story, but he was going to build a nightclub, and that's how he got to John Stork with Eddie Kramer, was his engineer, and he was going to build a studio because the record labels wanted to have control over the artists. And what they would do is they would lend them the money, not give them the money. When you got money up front, that was a lend against royalties or against record sales or publishing or whatever. And Jimi Hendrix signed everything. He just, he signed it, and that was it. So, but he started that. Electric Lady existed when I got to New York, and it was like, oh my God, and it was brand new, and it was all hippy-dippy with the Joshua Light Show and with everybody there. Anyway.
Cool.
I eventually got to work at a radio studio from, again, a friend of mine from the other side of the glass who said, oh, this studio over here needs an engineer. So I went and interviewed them, and they gave me a little studio, all my own. I didn't have to share it with anybody. And I started working. And after the first week, I was booked from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night because I was different than anybody else. But the studio location was off of Madison Avenue by 75 feet. So Mad Men, full bore in these days. Yeah. They were right around the corner. And they would do anything to not be in the agency. All the BBD&Os and the J. Waller Thompsons and the Kenyon and Eckhart's and all the big advertising agencies, the production people and the music people and the art directors, they wanted to not be in the agency. They wanted to go where it was fun to go. So that gave me an idea. Well, let me see if I can make my studio fun to come to. Well, I did. And I also was not a techie guy. I was a creative person as an engineer. And I was booked all the time, just all the time. Saturdays, Sundays, it was crazy time. This is 73, 74, 74. And I was getting tired. I was making $300 a week. It was good enough, but it wasn't good enough. So I decided that I would ask for a raise. Oh,
scary.
So I went in and I said, "Hi, I'd like to talk to you. I'm booked from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, and you're paying me $300 a week, no matter how many hours I work.
Right.
Could we work something out like overtime, or maybe commission, or something like that?"
Right.
And they went, "Nope." Okay, so I turned around and left. And I went back to the studio, pretty upset. David didn't want to listen, and I don't want to go into why. The owner of the studio was, one guy was absentee, who was the husband of a jingle singer who made a lot of money, who built the studio. And the other person was a salesman who, if you needed to get to him, you had to call the bar down the street to talk.
You were saying that. That's right.
Right.
Yeah, to give you a sense of time on the timeline of where we were at. Right.
O'Lunny's. So anyway, I went back the next day and I said, listen, I got an idea. How about if I go off salary? You don't have to give me a health plan, nothing. I'll get my own all the junk. And just pay me 10% commission, which would be like a $300 or $400 a week raise. But you don't have any of those other expenses like Blue Cross Blue Shield, the junk in those days.
Wow. Yeah. Good deal for them.
And they went, nope. And so So I left the studio, and the next day I went back in and I said, listen, I have a little bit of money from my bar mitzvah, and I was in a car accident. I have this little stash. Could I buy into the studio? Because we could really use some new equipment. I'll give you the money. You give me a piece of the studio. And they went, nope. So I said, okay, thank you. And I left the studio, and I'm thinking, okay, my future is sealed here.
Yeah, and you've just done 3 things. You've already tried.
I gave them three options to keep me. Yeah. And nope was their answer. And so I mentioned it to my biggest client, who I still know his son, and he was a client forever and ever. He was the music director of J. Waller Thompson, which was across the street in the Gray Bar building. And he leaned over to me and he said, you're really good. You should open your own place. And I went, really? Would you come see me? He said, absolutely. If you can do this in your own place, I'll give you all the money. This is Ford. This is the Army. It's just a million clients that I was doing anyway. He says, really? I said, really? He says, yeah, absolutely. So I said, okay. So now I got to figure out, how do I do this? My father was an accountant, so he does, okay, we're going to do a business plan. I never did a business plan. So he did for me, and okay.
Oh, that's great.
So I took the money that I said that I had the bar mitzvah money, and I opened a bank account with the money, and a guy that I played golf with was an attorney in the Gray Bar building, which is where J. Waller Thompson was. He says, you should come into this building, man. And it's like cheap. It's $6 a square foot a year. Not a month, a year.
Wow.
$6 a square foot a year. There's all kinds of space available because Condé Nast had just moved out of the building. Oh, okay. And there are all these floors that are available. And I moved up and I took 1,000 square feet on the 19th floor of an office building in Midtown. And then I said, okay, now what do? I got a space. I got to build it. So I said, what am I going to do? And I knew somebody who introduced me to John Storyk in 1974. And we started to design a studio. And I took the money that I put in the bank and I borrowed a pile of money against it. Then I took some of that money and I put it in another bank and I borrowed. So I did a little pyramid. In those days you could. There was no computers. Everything was on my credit cards, which I joined American Express in 1972. My card still says 1972 on it.
Really?
So,
oh, my God.
Yeah. So whenever I call him up and I say, can you do it? Of course, Mr. Schwartz. I've been a member for 50 years. So,
wow.
So anyway, so John and then I said, John, okay, now I got to go buy the equipment. Where am I going to get that? Oh, well, you got to meet this guy. I said, okay. And it's another gentleman by the name of Ambrosius who became my mentor. And so I started to buy the equipment, and I opened one studio. So we're in the middle of, I signed the lease. We're in the middle of construction, and I'm still working at the other studio, trying to keep it on the down low, on the real down low.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get fired. What am I going to do?
God, how do you keep all that work that you're doing there secret too? Because that's kind of big stuff. Yeah.
I wasn't there. I let the architect be the project manager as well. He did everything. Except one day the contractor called me. I was at a charity golf tournament. Even though I was only making $300 a week, $300 was a lot of money in 1974. And I belonged to this country club in Harrison. I lived in a basement apartment in Scarsdale, but it was huge. And I took the train in every day, and I met all these people on the train that were in the advertising business and da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. So I was not there. I was playing golf, and when I came in the next day, the owner of the studio came in the middle of a session and said, "Give me your keys." I said, "Why?" He said, "There was a robbery here last night, and we're changing all the locks on the door." Oh, okay. And my friend, who was the one who said I should go into my own business, was my client. And I said, "Isn't that strange? That's kind of weird." And he said, "Yeah." And then 10 seconds later, the guy comes back after I gave him the keys. Yeah. And he says, "You're fired. Get your stuff. You're leaving right now." And I went, "Really? What happened?" "Well, we got a phone call yesterday where somebody asked to leave a message for you that the glass came in for the control room and they needed to move it a little bit and they wanted your permission to move it." And I went, So he said, "Are you building a recording studio?" I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Okay, you're done. Bye. You're out."
Yep.
So that was in June.
74 or
June of 75.
75.
I opened,
right, that's right.
I opened in August 11th, 1975.
Nice. Yeah.
My first, I remember who my first voiceover, this guy's name was Peter Thomas. He was one of the most famous voiceover guys in the whole world. And he called me up and he said, "Howie, I got to record today." I said, "I'm not going to open until tomorrow. The class isn't in." He said, "I don't care. Just do it on headphones. I got to do this for IBM." He's the voice of IBM. Okay, fine. So I put the headphones into a Scully tape recorder that had a mic pre in it. I don't know if if everybody's going to understand it.
Other people will more than me. That's for sure.
This gobbledygook. Anyway, I did the recording for him, and he was out of the studio by 8:10 in the morning. And we finished off with the glass, and we did a run through. We were wiring all this time, with the sawdust and everything. And I opened on August 11th, 1975.
Awesome. Yeah. That's when you know you're in. That's when you know you're going to have something also successful, when people are already wanting something from you before you're open.
Oh yeah, it was pretty scary. And then I was booked solid for the next 30 years.
That's great.
But I started with one studio. The following, I got discovered by a jingle company the next year, and then I built a second studio in 1978. Then I built two more studios in 79 and 80. So I had 4 studios by 1980. And I was in the television business, and I was always looking for the right people because I couldn't do it all myself.
Well, so, I wanted to see, how did that feel? Like that point in time when you knew you were going to be opening the studio. It's scary enough to do that, right? And then somebody finds out. Maybe you had a sense that eventually they were going to find out anyway. But you always want to kind of control, how that happens and any of that.
Yeah.
But how did all that feel to you? Like, what was your mindset?
It brought a whole new meaning to the word diarrhea. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was scared. I was scared out of my mind.
Yeah.
Because here I was, it was 1975, so I was 28 years old. And I'm going, okay.
You had a wife too.
I had a wife, no kids, but she was my receptionist. She was working at an advertising agency. We met in Toronto and we came to New York together. It was very scary, but I wasn't afraid because my billing, nobody paid anybody on time in those days. There was no computers. We didn't even have copying typewriters to do labels. Bing, bing, 2 fingers at a time.
Yeah.
The IBM Selectric, I think, came out in 78 or 79. So it was crazy.
Yeah.
But I started out with I started out with a 4-track, a 2-track, and a mono machine, and the heads changed on the 4-track and the 2-track, so I could make stereo copies of stuff, and I could make mono copies. And then within months, I bought a 16-track machine. But my console, I bought a 16-track console, but it had 30 inputs. And then I think after 2 years, I bought another console, and I learned how to borrow money. 1979, when I decided to build my bigger studios, I got an SBA loan. Learned how to do that, and I borrowed $1 million. 1979. Prime rate was 19 3/4, and I was paying 5 3/4 over prime. So I was paying 25% interest.
Wow. Yeah.
And I didn't think I was going to make it. But I was still taking home $300 a week.
Yeah.
I just, gave the money to the people who worked for me. But I kept hiring. That was the big deal for me. Was I stayed in the studio till 1986. I mean, stayed in mixing, recording and mixing, because it had my name on the door. So we'll go back. How did I get called Howard Schwartz Recording? Wally Heider, who was my employer in L.A., the one that was owned by the Beach Boys and Filmways and whatever he sold it to. He said, put your name on the door, like he did. It's called Wally Heider Studios. And if they didn't write studios down, he put his hands in the air and he said, you cash it.
What does that mean?
It didn't say Inc. It didn't say studios. So I put my name on the door. It was called Howard Schwartz Recording. And if it didn't say recording on it, I cashed it.
I don't understand what that means. You cashed it.
I didn't declare
the check.
It.
Oh, the check. Got it.
The check. I didn't.
Got it.
Declare it. But he told me to do that, and I said, "Oh, that's cool."
Yeah. Yes.
So there was plenty of games because there was, if the IRS called you, it had to be really bad because it wasn't some fly-by-night thing.
Yep.
So today you get letters from all these people.
I'm sitting there thinking like, oh, you got to put your name on the door to promote yourself, and you do that, but at the same time,
if I was going to call it Apex Recording, who's going to know that it was me? The thing that I was selling when I opened it was me.
Right.
So, and I've been known to self-promote.
Yeah.
So, but it was.
That's what I was going to say. Go ahead.
It was, I brought a sensibility that I learned in L.A., which was about, and you and I talked about this before, about how do you take care of people? And how do you make them feel good? I was in a salon, the talking salon the other day, where they were talking about Jimi Hendrix, and so it was Eddie Kramer and John Storyk were talking about why Jimi Hendrix wanted his own studio. He said, well, he lived in an apartment in the West Village, and he wanted to be able to walk to his other home. So he made the studio into his other home. He wanted to be able to have a great time. If he wanted to get crazy, he could do that at home. And if he wanted to go work in a safe atmosphere where he could control what was going on around him. Yeah. So that's what I created in the studios also. I always had lots of lobbies, areas where there was food, and my tradition was bagels. In the 40 years that I was in business, I probably served 1 million bagels it was 4 dozen bagels every morning with 2 pounds of butter and 2 pounds of cream cheese, not counting the 5,000 cups of coffee and and all the meals, and everybody was on the cuff. Well, everybody was, the agencies paid for everything. Yeah. It wasn't a lot of record label business, but I did do a lot of records. And when I built the studios, I said, "Oh well, if I don't get successful, if I have some downtime, I'll figure out. I'll find some group and I'll make them rich and stuff like that." It didn't work out like that.
But you created a community.
I did.
That is a sense of place where people can go and connect, and yet people are very drawn to that. They were then, they are now.
The thing that's fun now, is unfortunately, we all get together and we tell stories about each other when somebody passes.
Yeah.
And we all get online and we tell stories about, you remember when Bob did this and Bob did that and did that, and it was at your place, Howie, and that. And so, it was do you give the water away in the bottles? I mean, we used to have the with the cups and everything, and then, then all of a sudden it was very chic to have a bottle of Poland Spring and the bottles of water. And the talent used to come up to the studio because I never checked, and because we recognized them, they would walk through the door thinking they knew where they were going. They would go straight to my kitchen, and they would take 4 or 5 bottles of water and put them in their purse or into their briefcase to take the train home. Because I was above Grand Central Station. I even put in the schedule for all the people that worked in the studio, mostly me, to catch the last train to Scarsdale. So it was just it was a different time. Yeah, it was a different time. And so where do you want to go after this?
Well, no, I mean, we've covered a ton of what I'd love to really, hear about is that, going into the evolution, and, clients, stories, evolution, like, and that evolution is along with your personal path. So, you've started it, you've built this place, and you've created something that, I mean, one of the things I wanted to say was, when people are doing their own thing like this, the confidence there's a lot of hardship, there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of fear, but you had something, you knew you had something that was different, and you knew other people would support it, right?
No, actually, no, I was scared shitless all the time because there were no contracts that you could sign. There were no NDAs, and there was people didn't want to do that because there were other vultures around like me. I stole a lot of employees, and listen, in 40 years I had 1,000 employees. There were times when I had 75 employees at once, but the revolving door was always there. The mixers were there. Some mixers stayed for 20 years. Some mixers stayed for 20 minutes. I built a studio for a guy who never showed up. He was stolen before he got to me. Wow. He carried that around with him for a long time because he actually signed a contract and then he signed a contract and left. And he didn't have anything I could sue him for. Right. What am I going to do? Just cease and desist? I got involved in a couple of those when people came to work for me. I didn't know that they had non-compete clauses because they lied or they didn't know. The thing that was most important to me was I wanted everybody to be whatever they wanted to be, figuring that the rub-off for the company will be good if they're successful. And if they weren't successful at it, they'd be as unsuccessful if I managed them as well. Because I hired attitude all the time. If somebody didn't have a good attitude, I don't want you. Go away. Sets the tone. If somebody smells like fish, it's fish. It's just, what are you fooling yourself? It doesn't smell like roses. It's fish. There's something wrong here. And I was very protective of the threshold of the facility. Everybody that came in, I don't like using the word team, but everybody was part of our family. which goes beyond team.
Yep.
And there was trust. There was a lot of trust.
Oh.
And when the trust was broken, you're gone. And that was very obvious. I made that very well known. I had lots of people with, substance problems and drinking problems and family problems. And I remember one gentleman came up to me and he says, "You know why I come in here every day? I love it here, but I don't love going home." And I went, "Oh."
Yeah.
And I said, "You got kids. You got to go home." And
Yeah.
he said, "Well, I really like it here better." I said, "No kidding." It was a fun place. It was just a fun place. It was big. You could always have a place to hide. There was always a window you could open and smoke, even though they changed all the laws. I mean, they changed our elevators. They changed our elevators so badly that when I sold one of my old big consoles that was about 92 feet long, it was just a huge console.
Yeah.
I sold a console to Hans Vollenweider. I don't know if you know who that is. He's a electric harp player, like rock and roll. He's from Iceland or Sweden or Norway or someplace like that. Anyway, he came to the studio, and we actually hung. They had changed the elevators since I bought the thing, and we took the elevator up a few floors and hoisted the console up into the elevator shaft, and then dropped it down and had 23 guys downstairs.
Wow.
And it was crazy. In New York, usually you see pianos being delivered to apartments through the windows on the street with a crane.
Yep, that's like Laurel and Hardy, like any of those old
slowly
films.
I turned. Slowly I turned.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
There's all kinds of stories like that. So the thing that I wanted to do was surround myself with people that I would have fun with, and hopefully that they would too. That I wanted my clients to just say, I will only do it with Howie. The people that I entertained as my sleeping salesmen were talent agents, because I would take care of them so that they would send me their clients, because they would say Liam Neeson only works at Howard Schwartz Recording, or Susan Sarandon only works at Howard Schwartz Recording, or Alec Baldwin always works at Howard Schwartz Recording. So, and that happened every day. So Jeffrey Katzenberg and I became friends a long, long time ago, and all of a sudden I got Disney. I met him when he was at Paramount or United Artists. I don't remember which one it was. Yeah.
It's always about who you know. Yeah.
And so and we would play the geography game. Do you know this guy? You know this guy? You know this guy? You know this guy? Oh, yeah. I dated her, and her father was my lawyer, and this one was this, and I go to the restaurant all the time, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that, how do you promote yourself without really promoting yourself? I would go and visit everybody at the agencies or the agents or advertising agencies, television companies. And the one thing that was a constant was everybody had a ZAGAT on their desk.
Oh, yeah.
But it said ZAGAT. So I called them up and I said, "Hey, can I get my logo on your book?" And they said, And they called me back and they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Really?" He said, "How many are you going to order?" And I said, 500. I can't do it for 500. I said, "What?" Okay, 1,000. So I ordered, my first ZAGAT was in 1980 something, early. And I had my logo put on the ZAGAT, and I gave them away for Christmas. And it probably cost me at least $10,000.
Yeah.
Maybe $15,000. It was the best money I ever spent, because I would go into everybody's office and there would be my logo on their desk.
Yeah.
Right by their phone.
Yeah. Yeah. But
And
you
then
understood what that meant and what that did. Yeah.
Well, the creatives.
Yeah.
Can you get me into this restaurant? Can you get me into that restaurant? And I used to do that for everybody, and I had a few connections here, and I would get to meet the maitre d's, and I would do what's called Howie's picks, and I would pick out 20 restaurants that I liked that were in the book or that weren't in the book yet. Mm-hmm. And so that was always the big deal. And people used to come in and scream, "Where's my ZAGAT?" I said, "I didn't see you work here last year. You don't get a ZAGAT unless you work here. It's a thank you."
Yeah.
So it's how do you market?
Right.
Put yourself. Everybody put the little boxes that we sent the dubs out, copies of commercials and stuff. Everybody put their names on the front of the box. Mm-hmm, That's not what you see when it's in a bookcase. You see the side of it.
Right.
I put my name on all the sides. Mm-hmm. I had special labels made for the 1/4-inch tapes and for cassettes and for DVDs and all those things, so that HSR, which we changed the name to probably 25 years ago, 20 years ago, that logo stood out.
Yeah.
So that when they were thinking about it, I once gave away for Christmas sweatpants. Because everybody was running in the park and
Right.
And I put my logo on the leg of the sweatpants.
Yep.
But I put the phone number upside down so that you could just look down and read the phone number.
That's smart. Yes.
You follow that? My logo was my logo because everybody recognized the logo. But the phone number was, if you lifted your knee up, you could go to your shoe phone.
Yep. Your shoe phone.
Well, the phones were.
They were like shoe. They were. That's great back then.
So
yeah. Well, being an apparel designer, working with the big companies and stuff, it's like I understand the logo placement and why we did all kinds of things as well. It's complete business reason, and then you have to incorporate it into the design. So, yeah.
I see. So I see a lot of designers now putting the tags on the outside.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that you can see what it is.
Yep. Yeah, you want to get that out there.
Uniqlo puts their logo every place, and there's a million people that are doing that now.
It's a badge of honor. It's just like when you say, like, it says something to people when you put it on there. So, but you understood that exactly. You understood that really early on with that, and just that tenacity and doing something with it. It's who you know. It's the relationships.
I remember when I met Ralph Lifshitz. And that's his real name.
Yes, I know. That's right.
And his brother,
Ralph Lauren.
his brother, I played golf with him all the time. And Ralph dated a friend of mine, and before he married Ricky, and they lived in the neighborhood. They lived in Bedford, and so he was a good guy. Mm-hmm. But originally he was just the guy that had that little tab on the lapel of his sport coats and the big wide ties. That was his thing.
Yep.
And I did all the commercials for a company in Georgetown called Britches of Georgetown, which was a very famous 20-store chain of upscale men's and women's clothing. Mm-hmm. And I did it for trade. So they would give me all these tokens that are worth $100 for each token, and they would give me all this. And so once a year I would go there, and they would say, "Oh man, we're killing it out in Maryland someplace." And then we realized it was you that was there. The big day was a payoff for barter. Anyway.
Well, you were in New York doing all of this at a time when so many things like music, fashion, film, it was really a huge growth period, a big heyday for a lot of these things. And so in that community of everybody knowing each other and helping each other and building their businesses and stuff, that's what was going on in the 70s and 80s.
The 70s were, Studio 54. And,
exactly.
All the artists, the East Village artists, were getting famous. Keith Haring and Jean-Michel Basquiat, and I used to hang with those guys because they were. My friends were sponsoring them or financing them or whatever. I mean, when Keith Haring started, he was doing white goods. On top of graffiti, he was doing white goods. And white goods are the sides of refrigerators from a junkyard.
Ah,
and that's where those things are worth millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Totally crazy money. But
yeah.
he was a good guy, and his store was off of Houston Street down in the Village and Soho. Anyway.
Ah, so cool. There's a ton of stories in all of that too to branch off into. I mean, you ran this for you're all the studios there for how long? How many?
75 to 2014. 39 years.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, there's a notice in one of my calendars I saw that it was this month in 2014 that I threw in the keys.
Wow.
It was a sad day, but what happened is that the price of real estate in New York had gone through the roof, and I was in Midtown Manhattan, and the style of recording had changed. Nobody needed the big studios like I had, and I had 13 real studios and 20 edit rooms and stock music libraries and a casting company. And it was just this whole world where you would walk in and you would recognize 50% of the people walking around because they were movie stars, they were voiceover actors, they were musicians. They were all coming in, or even, athletes. Because we had Jack Nicklaus Productions, for example, was a client for years and years. CBS Sports was a client for a million years. And either the voiceovers or the people that coming and going, it was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun, and it was just great to be standing there. Where's Howie?
Yes.
Okay. I'd rather have you know my name than not.
Yeah. But I mean, it shows like it's almost a 40-year run. Is a massively successful run for any kind of business at all.
Right. Oh, there was good times, and there were some really bad times. 9/11 was a friggin' disaster.
Oh yeah.
Being above Grand Central Station, which was quote unquote a target.
Yep.
After the towers came down, every time they found a paper bag, they closed Grand Central, and they closed all the buildings attached to Grand Central, which was us.
Yeah.
So my inventory was time. I sold time, hours. So 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, times 13, times 20, times... That's how I made a living, is selling time. And any time I couldn't sell it, it was perishable. It would go away, and I could never sell it again. It's not like I had a shelf filled with shirts.
Right.
Was time was my inventory. So
that's
I got closed 20 times, 25 times, and the studio needed $50,000 a day more to survive. It was
stressful.
75 employees. Think about it. Yeah,
that's beyond stressful. Yeah,
didn't sleep a whole bunch then. We made it through. We got a couple of decent breaks, but I was too far north to get the real benefits of being south. I mean, I didn't want to be close to the World Trade Center. My friend owned the restaurant, Windows on the World, on top. Their wine, the wine storage was $40 million gone, not counting how many people died.
Right. And people don't quite know. I mean, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of that next month, and people don't quite know. Like, we're going through COVID and all the challenges we've all had, and that continue to happen right now. You guys went through that. It was more localized in certain areas. Everybody experienced it, but it was, unless you were there in New York really experiencing this, most people don't know that trauma. And so COVID has kind of brought that home to everybody.
Whenever 9/11 comes up, where were you on 9/11? I said, well, I came into the studio at 7:30 because I had an 8 o'clock meeting downtown. And I just said to the people that were there, because we had to open early because we were receiving materials, ISDNs and all kinds of stuff from Europe, from music, anyway. And I said, I'll be downtown today. And they all knew that my friend owned windows on the world. So when I said downtown, they kind of assumed that. Anyway, I was at a hotel on Washington Square. It's called the Washington Square Hotel. My friends owned it, and I was in a meeting.
I've been there. Yeah.
And somebody came into the meeting and said, the World Trade Center is on fire.
Oh, yeah.
And I went, what? And because I had this love of my life that was up there that I hadn't spoken to, but I ran outside into, the northwest corner of Washington Square, and you could see the Twin Towers, and there was smoke coming from one of them. And while I'm standing there, the other plane flew into it. And I'm going, okay, this is
chills.
We're not in Kansas. And so we stood there, and everybody's on their cell phones, but all the cab drivers pulled over because the cops were going crazy.
Yeah.
And they were all listening to their radios, and we're standing by the arch of Washington Square Park looking down, and all of a sudden the first tower went down.
Oh, my God.
And it was like, oh, God. And I turned around and I walked uptown, watching everybody pointing as they were coming downtown. I was walking uptown to get back to Grand Central because I said, there's something wrong in Mudville here.
Yeah.
So when I got back to my studios, it was like Pompeii after the volcano.
Yeah.
The TVs were on, the coffee was still on, there was toast and butter and bagels and food and no one.
Oh, wow.
They had evacuated the building, and they go, Howie, what are you doing up here? And I said, I don't know. So we're watching the dust ball.
Yeah.
Anyway, I caught the 3 o'clock train. Everybody was covered in soot.
Man.
And I was scared out of my mind because I just wanted to be by my children, and it was just an awful day.
Yeah.
And I could just see the meter on the cab going tick, tick, tick. I said, oh God, I feel bad for those souls, but what what are we going to do?
Wow.
There were you just had to stick your
you never forget
put your gloves on and go back to work.
You never forget it. Yeah. I wasn't in the, I was in Portland, but it was the same thing that the alarm went off in the radio. It was blaring that the first plane had gone in. So we went right to the TV and turned it on. Yeah. And so saw everything.
It was in the middle of the night for you guys. It was 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it was 6 o'clock, and that's when I had to get up. And so then we saw the next plane go in on the news, and then we saw the towers going down one by one, just with our, and then you just spend all day just kind of in this catatonic state, and we're in Portland, Oregon, and how it affected people, but hearing from friends in New York these stories like you just shared,
the murmuring of the people in Washington Square was unbelievable. It was just this, like, what a loop group is? A loop group is when you shoot without sound, and then you put in sound effects of people in restaurants, and it's a loop group. Murmur.
The murmur.
Peas and carrots. Peas and carrots.
Yeah.
And that was the sound, except for the radios from the cabs. There weren't the car service in 2001 wasn't really 2000. Wasn't really there, and it was whacked. It was just But anyway, we survived that, and we had 11, 12 productive years after that, and then it was just time for me to go.
Yeah.
I started the careers for a lot of people. A lot of those people enhanced my career. I give 100% credit to them for all of whatever they gave. And there were a few that were not nice, but most of them were very nice. And I tried to be as nice as I could to them, but it still was business. None of them were. You have to always think, okay, is she my friend? Is he my friend or not?
Right.
And you have to just be the boss. And this is for your structure people,
Yeah.
you have to decide when you just have to be the boss, and you can't fall back into the friend part, because what happens if it's like hiring family.
Right.
The buzzer goes off. Don't do it.
Yeah.
But it was just an interesting 40 years. It's more than half of my life I spent in those rooms, in the same address. How do you decide to do that? I don't know. Sometimes you just do it blind. You just do it because you don't know anything else. And the way that it all transitioned was crazy. In the 70s, the record labels and the television companies were all fighting about union junk, and they decided to get rid of their studios. And so the independence places like me, we had all these opportunities. And the people who were the salesmen at the RCAs and at the record labels and Atlantic and so on and so forth, who were selling studio time, they weren't doing that anymore because they were getting rid of that stuff. So Phil Ramone, when he built A&R Studios, his partner, Don Fry, was a salesman at NBC. He wasn't a studio manager. He was a sales guy. But he and Phil Ramone got along famously, and Don Fry became my friend as well as Phil was always my friend. Phil was a musician. He was a violin player. I don't know if anybody knows that Phil Ramone was on Ted Mack's Amateur Hour and came in second on the day that he was on the show to Morty Gunty, who was a stand-up comedian from the Catskills.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And Phil told me that story. It's a great story.
I could list out all the names of different people you've listed here, and that's just like a tiny little fraction of history, but I love like it's highlighting the fact that we often just see the tip. We just see the tip of the iceberg. We see the big names. We hear about the big name people, and there's so many wonderful people, talented, who do amazing work that have amazing stories. Yeah. And that's what I like to dig into and share, so that, because we can all be like striving for this big thing up here that is not all we ever crack it up to be.
It's not a direct line by any means. It's a very curved road, and with lots of bumps in it.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that just Orson Welles screaming at me. Did I ever tell that story?
I think you mentioned it before.
They chose Orson Welles to be the voiceover of the commercials, the trailers for Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yep.
And so the night before, he was at Radio City Music Hall for the Actors Fund or some big show. And so they got him to come to my studios, and he walks through the door. They say, okay, Orson's car is outside. So I run downstairs, and I go get him. I have met him before. And he was huge. He was like 350, 400 pounds. And the only way to get in from Lexington Avenue was through a revolving door that they opened for him, and it wasn't big enough. But we squeezed him through, and so on and so forth. And then there were 6 stairs that you had to go up to get to where the elevators were in the lobby. Very fancy lobby. It was built in the WPA in the 30s during the Depression. And he looks at me and stands in front of the stairs, and he looks in my face and he says, "You lied to me." And he's just like he's going to grab my neck. And he says, "You lied to me. You effing lied to me. You told me there were 4 effing stairs. There are 6 effing stairs." I said, "Okay, Orson, I'm going to help you get up." And I called one of the doormen, and we pulled him up the stairs.
Oh, God.
And there are 8 elevators in each elevator bank, so it was a pretty cool big old building. And So we got his own elevator, and he came in, and we got him a bottle of scotch, and he did his stuff. And then they called everybody that had anything to do with the movie to come over because Orson was talking and drinking. And he told stories about Winston Churchill and about all these, Orson Welles was a big deal.
Right, absolutely.
It was a really big deal.
Listen.
I mean, he was an old man, but he was a really big deal. And, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. The experiences
that was fun. So the people that came in and out of my, that came over my threshold, it's like coming to my house.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I tell the stories, these are real stories. It's not like I was in somebody else's house recording that guy. I did a lot of those too, but going to, Democratic National Committee's offices were in the Graybar Building because the Graybar Building was owned by S.L. Green, and Steve Green's brother was the ombudsman for the city of New York, and the DNC was in the building for free. So Hillary Clinton was always in the building, and she would come upstairs to make all her commercials. And when she would come upstairs, she would go, "Hey, Howie, so and so," because we knew each other. We knew each other a lot. I was at their house, and the Secret Service would go crazy. It's Senator, it's Mrs., it's something, everything else. It's
you gotta call it the right
and so
thing.
I said, "Hillary, what do I do?" And she says, "Turn the mic off." And I said, "Okay." So come back in. And so because I was the settling when they were nervous. I went in there and took care of them. Yeah. So we had a few presidents, and it was and almost presidents, and so
wow, that's more than a fly on the wall, too. It's like setting that place for people to do what they need to do. That's a piece. It's so much history.
It was always funny coming off the elevator. It happened more often than I can remember, where the shiny shoe guys with the little squiggly thing and the aviators standing at the front door. I say, "Okay, guys, who do we have today?" "Oh, you have General Schwartz today, and we got Vice President Ford today." And oh God, it was a whole bunch of
stuff. Well, I think that the thing I take away from this as well, for the audience is, for one, like tapping into just being who you are, like you're saying, just being Howie, doing what you do, and then creating this sense of place for things to happen, and when you're starting your own thing or you're running your own business, just there's a natural, I don't know, you might have just kind of a recap to say about that, but that what I'm hearing is, you got fired a lot because you were staying true to yourself. And just being who you were, but looking for even at the path of least resistance. What's my path? What path am I going to walk? Right. And then creating a place that people felt comfortable and couldn't do what they needed to do as well.
The term pride of place was very important to me. Somebody coined that pride of place, and so it was. And I never made my sign big. The sign that was on my front door is this big. It just said Howard Schwartz. That was it. And Howard Schwartz Recording, or HSR Inc., HSRNY. It had a few names, but it was still me, and it was always Howie's place. But I tried to be true to the core values of what I was doing. Not me, not them, about, okay, we're going to make the best recording of you. It's up to you, not me.
Yeah.
The talent, whatever you say out in that studio, whatever you play out in that studio, whatever you shoot out in that studio, I'm going to make sure that it goes through those wires the best way possible and gets stored so that it can be repeated and repeated and repeated. And that was the mantra that I was always... And the most creative as possible. If somebody was having trouble, we'd get them out of trouble. So it's it's the assistant producer who's doing the session because the producer is at a different mix. So how do I make that person look like a champ, like a, because it wasn't about us. It was always about them.
Yeah.
And as it is, one of my not favorite words, it was always we, it was always us, and it was always our. I never said I in the studio. We can do that. We can do that. I will have us do,
Yeah.
So trust us, because it was never just me.
Yeah.
It was never just me. And it's like the pinball machines where the ball goes up in the top and then it goes around and it hits this and it hits. I'm doing hand motions which aren't showing up in the camera, and it hits there and it hits there, and it was what's the path of least resistance is where it goes, and my path is very crooked. Not crooked from a not good. It's not straight. It wasn't a straight path to where I wound up. It was many different directions.
Yeah.
As I said, I got fired from every job I ever had, and just as I was about to quit, they would say, "You're fired." And I go, "Ah! Give me one chance to say I quit." I never was able to say I quit.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I sort of did when I closed the studios up because I didn't want to pay the rent anymore. It was just enough. Right. And I didn't want to die. I turned 65 and it was time. But there's one of the things that I learned how to do, which gave me an insight that I was going to get fired, is I learned how to read upside down. I was always... Remember, we talked about a book called The 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey.
Yep.
And so I was that monkey for a long time. Prior to me opening my own business, I didn't know that. And what I would do is I would always walk into the boss's office, and I would shoot the breeze with him, her, whoever it was, and I would look down at their desk, because I had really thick glasses in those days. Didn't have the skinnies where you could see your eyes.
Right.
And I would read upside down what's going on. They wouldn't have enough smarts to cover up what they were doing or put their hands over it to make it more obvious that I shouldn't see it. And I would read it and go, "Oh, that guy's making more than me." But I wouldn't say that to them. But I could see the payroll in front of them. It was just one of those tricks that I learned a long time ago, because I knew I was going to get fired from everything, because I got to a point where, you're not treating me or my clients, the way I would like you to treat them. So,
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah.
But what happens is that there's so many businesses, there's so many career paths that don't do what we're talking about. They're somebody else has that job of taking care of the clients. But my thing was always that every single person that worked for me had a client. And the client might be another employee, but somebody that's, up a level above you or has more experience than you. And those were the people that you had to learn how to take care of. So everybody in the studio had a client of some kind, even the person that cleaned the bathrooms. Your client is every single person here.
Yeah.
Your job is to make sure that nobody gets sick in here. And if they do get sick in there, your job is to clean it up. Yeah. But, it's like, I remember giving a speech to a school once, and I said, "You want to be in a recording studio business?" And I held up a plunger. I said, "The first thing you have to learn how to do is clean the bathroom, because I want to know if I can trust you with the real stuff, like a $10,000 microphone in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Because I have 22 microphones. Each one's worth 10 grand. Neumann's and Telefunkens and all this, the expensive stuff. Yeah. And why am I going to let you play with it? You have to earn that trust. Yeah. And, there was a story the other day about the tape that got erased of the Steely Dan recording because the technical engineer was toning up a tape and erased 2 songs.
Oh, God.
And the studio had to give him studio time for a year.
Wow.
I think it was Gaucho. I'm not mistaken, it was Gaucho.
For Gaucho. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but you look that one up, and when Donald Fagen tells that story, you want to die.
Yeah. 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 That's big stuff. Yeah.
That was big stuff. Recording over a master with tones.
Oh my God. Oh God, no. Oh man, Howie, I could sit here and listen all day. I know you have you've got to get so many of these recorded, and that's kind of why I wanted to dig into some of this here is to get some stories, and so more of them, just get it down there, because they're valuable, and we learn from them. They're entertaining, and they're history, they're real, so
it's I'm one of the older guys left. There's some guys that Jack Douglas is older than me, so he has plenty of stories about the record plant and the Beatles and that kind of stuff. And then when we get together, and Eddie Kramer, and when we get together, it's a, pardon my French, it's a shit show, because okay, my story's better than yours. Wait a minute, I got the real story.
You guys should record that. Oh my God, that's great, because the industry is changing, and it's want to capture that point in time.
Yeah, it was just interesting watching stuff go on. 1975, when I started, was the beginning of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And all I wanted to do was be involved with Saturday Night Live. I thought that was the cat's ass. I wanted to be in the heyday. I knew all those guys already from just hanging out Second City and so on and so forth. And I wanted to be a part of that. And it took me 4 years. In 1979, I got involved with Saturday Night Live through a guy by the name of Bob Lifton, who's no longer with us. And many years later, I was supplying them with all of their equipment.
Nice.
Because NBC said, we're not buying any more equipment for Lorne Michaels, outside of the fact he's the largest producer.
Oh, that's so great.
But Studio 8H, there's a history there. Arturo Toscanini with the NBC Symphony Orchestra. It was built for him. That's a whole other story about and the orchestra there. And I played all that music of that orchestra. The library of Toscanini's library was given to the University of Buffalo and the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra. And as a kid, I got to play all those scores. It was fantastic.
Oh my God, so great.
Anyway,
there's so much great stuff, and I really appreciate you sharing and digging in, and I mean,
it's my pleasure.
Yeah, I get so much out of it. It sparks me, because it's these things, like it's the hard work, it's the dreams, it's the the stuff that drives people to do things, and you don't give up. You keep going. So keep going.
I'll throw two little stories in. So
okay.
One of the things that happened was after the Academy Awards sometimes were in New York, in Radio City Music Hall.
Yep.
After the Academy Awards, because the talent that won the Academy Awards was in New York, all the advertising agencies wanted them to do their commercials. So they would make deals ahead of time of, you the favorite and so on and so forth. So I had two people that won awards, won Oscars, that came to the studio, and they were hysterical. One was Olympia Dukakis, who won for Moonlight. And the other one was Jack Palance, who did the one-hand push-up for City Slickers with Billy Crystal. And remember he did the one?
Yeah.
He had a watch. I had a watch. Remember when he pulls his
out of the horse?
Pulls his out of the ass of a horse or a cow or whatever it was. Yeah. Anyway, so Olympia Dukakis is on the phone with a producer, and he's giving her a hard time. It's a guy who's way too young, sorry to say that, and doesn't know what he's talking about. And she's a storied movie star. I mean, the movie was a rebirth for her. And she absolutely said, "Is the mic on?" So make sure the mic's on. And I said, "Yeah, the mic's on." Push the buttons. Yeah, the mic's on. She says, "Who do I have to sleep with to get off this commercial?" Okay.
Into the mic.
Yeah, into the
Yeah,
mic. She said,
yeah.
she said, did he get that? And he goes, on the other end of an ISDN line or whatever it was. He goes, yes, I did. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the Jack Palance was a similar situation where he absolutely did the push-ups in the studio again for the producer that was sitting behind the desk. And he was the voice of, I think, a Ford commercial or something like that. Anyway. So
You got to do this.
they all come and they go.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, then Martin Scorsese walked into a studio that was not where he was supposed to be. And he was, how he talks real fast. And he goes, I'm not in here, right? and all the people from the advertising agency are going, is that Martin Scorsese? Yes.
Oh my God, that's
so
great.
those are the little stories that they don't mean anything to anybody except that they're a good chuckle because they're just real people. Tom Hanks we were doing Toy Story 1. It wasn't one. It was Toy Story. And so he came up to the 19th floor. He's a friend. A very good friend of a friend of mine. And so I get a phone call that says, Howie, I think this guy's name is Tom Hanks. He's in my office. Come and get him. And he was on another office on the floor. It was huge floors. And so I go to the office and say, Tom, you're over here. He says, Howie, in the voice of Woody. Howie. So anyway, that night he and I went to a Steven Spielberg tribute that was being given by the New York movie business something at the Waldorf Astoria. And as I said, are you going tonight? And Tom says to me, yeah, I'm going. And I said, great, I'll be there too. Because I always made a donation with my cousins. We all put a table together. And I said to him as we were leaving, I said, if you see me, say hi. So he says, no problem. And we say goodbye. And then, so I go, black tie, and we're at the Waldorf, and I'm standing with my cousins, and I'm just kind of standing, looking over everybody's head. And trying to find Tom Hanks, and all of a sudden I see him walk in, and he catches my eye, I catch his eye, and he stands up on a chair, and he goes, Howie! In that voice. My cousins go, how do you know him?
That's beautiful. He's a great guy.
I remind him every time I see him. You remember what? He says, Waldorf Astoria. Howie.
Yeah. Anyway. They understand the power of that kind of thing, so that's so great. Yeah.
He made a memory. Oh, that's another one. That's a thing that I say. I heard it at a funeral where somebody's father always gave everybody in this guy's family got money for a birthday. If it was Paul's birthday, everybody got the same amount of money, and he would go around, he'd take whatever he had, wad it up, put it in the kid's hand, and he said, you are not allowed to put this money in the bank. You must spend this money because you are going to make a memory. And we all started to cry. And so sorry, I'm a crier, but that's so yeah. That's what I did my whole life. I made a memory.
Yeah, you're gonna make me cry. That's good but that sums it up. It's like, what's important in the world? What's important in life?
As long as it didn't kill anybody, make a memory. Yeah. Make it a good memory.
Oh my God, that's probably the best thing to walk away with today. Yeah. Make a memory and make an impact in people's lives. That's how you do it with that. That people
doesn't
remember
matter
those
how you
things.
Do it. Just do it.
That's beautiful.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's easy to screw up. It's hard to succeed. Just work as hard as you can at it. Every job I ever had, I made up. Fake it till you make it. Remember that line?
Yep.
That's the other one. It says, even if you can't do it, tell them you can, and then figure out how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you, Howie.
Michelle, it was a pleasure. I can't wait to put my air conditioning on. It's about 9,000% humidity in my studio.
Oh, man. You just left it with a great piece. Thank you so much.
Thank you.